It's the John and Ken Show. John Cobelt and Ken Shampoo, welcome. How are you?
Well, we're going to get right into it in a couple of minutes. We'll be talking to Congressman Darrell, Issa, returning once again to the John and Ken Show. He's got the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. And this is, of course, about Operation Fast and Furious, the scandal we've been following now for several months since the story broke. And, of course, it really got us our attention back in December when a Border Patrol agent by the name of Brian Terry was killed in Arizona. And one of the guns found at the scene was traced back to this Fast and Furious gun program, which simply was the brainchild of the Justice Department and the ATF. The idea was let the straw purchasers, they call them, buy the guns in the U.S. and let the guns flow back to Mexico, and we'll track them down and we'll get the big get.
And now there's word that a second immigration agent who was killed in Mexico may have been the victim of one of these guns. Darrell, Issa, on the line. We've got him. Darrell, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Thank you for covering this. This is one of those things that makes Iran-Contra seem less stupid than it actually was. And as you said, letting guns deliberately flow, not following them, hoping that when you find them at the scene of a murder, that somehow the gun's going to tell you something. Obviously, guns don't talk that way.
Now, obviously, this was a bad idea to begin with, Darrell, but just how incompetently was it carried out as well? Have you found that out yet?
Well, that's one of the great questions. As we initially said, oh well, this is ATF. These are the guys that gave us Ruby Ridge. We'll assume that they're at fault. Well, as we learned more, we discovered no, they were kept out of the loop. They were sort of the guys asked to just do the job. And in many cases, DEA, the Justice Department, FBI knew things that they just didn't share with with ATF. So, for example, ATF in Mexico never knew when they found a weapon that was used, that was purchased under Fast and Furious. They didn't even get the information on who to call to let them know they found a weapon that had been sold by these straw buyers.
They didn't even implement this program properly?
Exactly. The left hand and the right hand were very often kept in the dark. Now, some of it you can understand. You had a program like this, you wouldn't necessarily want to have a law enforcement agent in Mexico who might be compromised and so on. But you figure you've got three guys, the liaisons, working directly for the ambassador in Mexico. You figure you'd bring them to the States and read them into the program. Nothing like that happened. And on Tuesday, there'll be some of the people testifying as to how they were not trusted by their own law enforcement, and it was part of the reason that people on both sides of the border have died as a result of this ill-conceived plan.
Why does it get like this? If I was running some kind of government program to track weapons that were going to end up in the hands of the drug cartels, I'd be scared to death about a million things going wrong. And, I'd be obsessive-compulsive on wanting to get everybody involved to do their jobs properly, pay attention to all the detail. Why is it always so half-assed?
That's one of the great questions here. Only twice did they have any tracer device placed on the weapons or in the cases where the weapons were. Once it was a Radio Shack product that the ATF guys just did on their own. Once it was a little bit more sophisticated device that apparently a U.S. agency provided them. But in both cases, the products only worked for a short time. In one case, and this is my favorite, they followed it on the GPS tracking, if you will, till it was about 50 miles inside Mexico, and then it went dead. But more importantly, they didn't have somebody following this. They have no idea who got it in Mexico. In the other case, they actually followed it north, well into Arizona, which, of course, is where Brian Terry was killed by weapons that instead of going to Mexico and killing Mexicans, which I guess in some strange, perverse way was the plan, this one went north and a U.S. Border Patrol agent was gunned down.
All right, the big question is how high did the knowledge of this program go in the Department of Justice?
Well, the approvals, too, yeah.
And the approvals. Like, who conceived this and who approved it and who knew about it? And does it go all the way up to the Attorney General? Does it go all the way up to the President?
Well, we can give you this answer as of today. It goes to the people immediately below Eric Holder, the deputy Attorney General, and Lanny Brewer, who's the head of the sort of basically the the unit of AG that deals with, prosecuting crimes like this. So it goes right up to Eric. The amazing thing is, although the Attorney General on April 2nd of 2009 flew to Mexico City to talk about expanding the parent program, Gun Runner, and how he was going to get additional Border Patrol agents, oddly enough, using stimulus money, he did all this speech about what they were doing. But now he says, well, he was never briefed until he read it in the newspaper, basically a week before or 2 weeks before he came before Congress, which was months after Brian Terry was gunned down. So you have to believe that he knew enough to know they were doing a program, but never got read into it. So it's kind of one of those people below him knew and ran it. He wants to play dumb, and it's less believable than anything to do with who knew about Iran-Contra in the White House.
So you think he knew about it?
Well, I think you have two choices. Either he deliberately didn't want to know about it, which is, pretty much dereliction of duty, or he knew about it and he's lying. Now, I tend to take him at his word that he's not lying, which means that he deliberately didn't want to know, and he didn't know what he should know, even when his own people knew that a U.S. federal agent had been killed with one of these weapons, even when his own people panicked. When Gabrielle Gifford was gunned down, all the emails we're seeing indicate they were frantic to find out if the weapons used to shoot her and the federal judge could have been Fast and Furious guns. They were scared stiff that this national story would go back to their failed program. Now, if people at a local level are scared stiff, why in the world isn't Eric Holder read into it? My assumption is he didn't want to be. But not wanting to be doesn't take you away from the blame of your people who you directed did this. And if you didn't want to know, that's fine. You still have to be responsible for an ill-conceived plan.
This was an unprecedented, dangerous program. It's hard to believe that the approvals didn't go pretty high up.
Well, the approvals may have gone high up. Here's the thing that's driving us nuts now is we found just as part of our investigation and the cover-up that was being done broadly by the Attorney General's Office and Justice, that they leaked a sort of half of an email to the press trying to embarrass the first whistleblower, Dodson. And now we finally, and we're very appreciative, the Inspector General at Justice is now inspecting that, looking into it, because it's pretty clear that that was leaked to try to discredit a whistleblower. And, of course, we got the other halves of the email and made it very clear that if you send out half, you think this guy was part of it. If you see the other half, he's talking about his opposition to this failed program. So the retaliation coming from the Obama White House is beginning to look about as bad as it could. Cover up and then vilify those people who are trying to get the truth out.
Well, when you have the Department of Justice going into protection mode and they want to cover for all the major players that might be at risk, how do you cut through that as a congressional investigator? How do you get through all the BS?
Especially since they're Democrats, you're a Republican, we'll start this whole political thing.
Well, the first thing we do is we go to the press because the pressure comes from public scrutiny. And, Democrats in vast numbers, and plenty of people who I would never know what their registration is, are outraged about this. Additionally, we do have subpoena power, and we have the power of whistleblowers. This week, we have additional whistleblowers coming forward, giving us additional documents, many of them documents we requested from Justice and never got. So that's part of what happens in a case like this is people, good citizens, or people sometimes who are afraid of being implicated by this, they come forward and give us the information we need. It's sad, though, that this administration isn't willing to be open and transparent because they've claimed that's what it's all about. But clearly President Obama's answer about Eric Holder is, well, neither I nor Eric Holder authorized this program. And that's as far as President Obama has gone so far.
All right, hang on. We're talking to Congressman Darrell Issa, the Republican in Vista and that whole area. He's talking to us about the Fast and Furious program because obviously he's got a key position in investigating this, the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and they've got a bunch of hearings going on to try to get to the bottom. Operation Fast and Furious, if you don't know by now, that's the one where they purposely let guns purchased in this country walk across the border into Mexico to try to trace them, to make a big arrest, complete incompetent program. And, of course, the big story is we're going to talk about the other Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer who was murdered in Mexico, and maybe there was a gun found at that scene. But we do know that in Arizona, where Brian Terry was killed last December, a couple of guns found at the scene were traced to the Fast and Furious program.
John and Ken Show, KFI, AM 640, more stimulating talk radio.
Tim Conway Jr. here. It is Thursday. That means tonight at 8 o'clock we play What the Hell Did Jesse Jackson Say?
Yes, sir!
We play clips. You got to guess what the hell he's saying. How about this one?
We want to...
What the H?
Tim Conway Jr. Tonight at 7.
KFI, AM 640.
Your daily dose of smartitude.
KFI, AM 640.
The John and Ken Show. John Cobelt and Ken Shampoo, one of the nuttiest things that the federal government has done in a while is Operation Fast and Furious, run by the ATF. They watched gun runners for the Mexican drug cartels buy all kinds of weapons, hundreds and hundreds of weapons here in this country.
But because they were low-level, what they call straw buyers, they really wanted to get the big guys, so they let the weapons walk. 1,700 weapons. Later on, 200 were found at crime scenes in Mexico. We've talked before about a couple of guns found at the shooting death of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry in Arizona last December. They were traced to this program. We got Congressman Darrell, Issa, who is all over this as part of his position on a House committee.
Well, there was another immigration agent, Darrell, that you're aware of, Jaime Zapata, shot to death by the Mexican drug cartel in Mexico. Any evidence that one of these Fast and Furious weapons was involved in his killing?
There's strong indications that he was targeted and that the weapons, at least weapons found and in the custody, appear to be from that program. What's really kind of the untold story is that the Mexicans are now accumulating larger and larger amounts. They want the serial numbers of all these weapons because they know which weapons killed Mexicans, and they want to know out of these 2,000 or so weapons, how many of them that were allowed to walk into Mexico killed Mexican citizens. And so far, apparently, we've been uncooperative in giving them that correlation of serial numbers to attack.
Would the Mexican officials be very angry if they found proof that we were feeding 1,700 weapons to the drug cartels?
Oh, they're already angry because they know we did. What they want is more corroboration onto the details, because the way they view it is, those people who bought those guns, those people who trafficked those guns, those people killed Mexicans, and they want them extradited. And one thing that your listeners may not be aware of is out of 20 arrests made, 19 of these people, low-level buyers, they're on the street. They were released. Only one is still incarcerated, and none have been charged in connection with Brian Terry's murder.
Did we get anything out of this at all? Did we bust any big names in the drug cartels by tracking these weapons?
19 of the people were end-user buyers, mostly people with meth problems. 2 of them had long felony records and would have ordinarily just been stopped if they hadn't been specifically allowed to make these purchases by the ATF. And only one, was a middleman who bought the weapons, and that's the highest person they've got.
It didn't lead us to anybody.
It didn't lead us to anywhere. That's one of the challenges. They talked about rolling up a rink in their announcement. I'll never forget seeing the video of this bragging about rolling up 20 straw buyers. Every one of these straw buyers could have been arrested basically the day they bought the guns.
Were they not legally eligible to buy the guns?
2 of them were convicted felons. They would have been arrestable on that alone. The rest of them only had to be followed to where they dropped off the gun, either stashed it or made the sale. Several times the ATF did follow people who bought these guns, saw them deliver them to people in pickup trucks who then drove away. They could have made the arrest at that point, and they would have gotten people they didn't get. They would have gotten the intermediate buyer right there. And it wouldn't have been a surprise that every once in a while the cartels lose someone. So, quite frankly, they could have rolled up a number of these people and seen if they would have rolled over the next guy they were delivering to. They didn't do it. Those are missed opportunities we'll never get back.
Did anyone in the Department of Justice call you up and say, Darrell, this wasn't such a bad idea? You know, no need to make such a big case out of this. Did they try to spin you? Did they try to wave you off the trail in any way?
Well, Lanny Brewer thinks it was a poorly executed program, but that it was a good program. He basically wants to blame
ATF and others for their ineptness rather than blaming the program that he approved, the wiretaps that he approved, the evidence that he saw not being shared with ATF and others. And look, I look and say this goes beyond Lanny Brewer. It goes beyond Eric Holder. It comes down to, is this the kind of administration of justice that you expect from a well-organized presidency? And it isn't. And there's been no action in the months that have gone on as we've done our investigation. The facts are mostly out there. I mean, we're still trying to get to the details that they are covering up. The fact is, by now the president's been briefed and nobody's been fired. No changes have been made that we've been made aware of. As a matter of fact, they still deny that they ever let guns walk. And this is the kind of hypocrisy that you have to hear. Under oath, they've said, we never let guns walk. Now, they find a way to define watching a gun being sold, watching it being sent to a drop-off place, watching an intermediary drive away with it, and then turning around and leaving and not knowing where it goes. They define that as not letting a gun walk. And you look and say, well, it depends on how you define it. And I remember when I was first told this under oath, all I could think about was somebody trying to tell me the meaning of is many years ago. And you think that federal agents, people coming to testify with us, would be smarter than to try to get into semantics about what gun walking is. It's pretty clear you don't let guns go into the hands of bad people. That's what our laws are for. That's what gun control is for.
Any laws broken here?
Lots.
Are they going to be prosecuted?
We're going to do our best to make sure that those who cannot be prosecuted are fired, those that should be prosecuted are prosecuted, and more importantly, something that I've personally pledged to the family of Brian Terry is the people involved that we can find who bought the guns or transported the guns that killed Brian Terry. They need to be charged with some form of the felony murder of Brian Terry. And right now, justice is not doing that.
All right, Congressman Issa, thanks for talking to us, and we'll stay on top of this, have you back on.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to come back.